Okay, so let's talk about the module search path. What's a search path? Well, you may have reflected, it's possible that you may have reflected that when we said import mymod, Python found mymod right in our local directory. And that is a default. If Python can find the module in the local directory, it'll use that module, and that works great. But what happens when I say import sys? Where does Python look? I mean, it can look in the local directory, but if it doesn't find sis.py in the local directory, you have to ask, where is it finding it? Because it does find it, and we know it finds it. It finds json.py, it finds pprint.py, all these different ones. It's able to find them. So how is it able to do that? I can tell you right now that it doesn't check your whole system, because your system could be vast. And in fact, in a sense, it is vast. If you added a new module just anywhere on your system and then expected Python to go and look for it, it would either have to do a full disk search, or it might have to pre-index the location of modules. Well, as it turns out, there is a set of specific places where Python will look for your module. What's interesting is, first, that we can find out where any module is located by checking a special attribute, what we call a magic attribute, which we've never touched on before. A magic attribute of the module, which will tell us the file location of the module. You can see that Python correctly identified the location of mymod in my project directory. This happens to be my project directory. You can see it up here. There's my project directory. You can see it's right there. This is my, I mistakenly called it .py. That was silly. But you can see that Python is making use of the file attribute to show us where it found that module. And in fact, we can do the same thing with any other module. I might look for the sys module, for example, and I'll find, that's probably one exception. Let's look at the JSON module. Sys module might be compiled in C, or may have some other internal location that doesn't resolve to an actual file. But if you look at the JSON module, for example, the JSON module has a location as well. And that location on my system, and your system may very well be different, is library frameworks, Python framework versions 3.7 lib, Python 3.7, and then /JSON. Now the init.py is something additional that has to do with what we call a package. A Python package can be a series of files that can be imported like a module. Doesn't really matter. We could also look for pprint. I'm curious about that one as well. I wonder if pprint is a little less elaborate. So there you see pprint.py is the name of the file, and there's the location for it. And what's actually interesting about that too is that if you can go and locate that file, you can take a look at it. If I want to actually look at the file pprint, I can do it. Looks like it was authored by a guy named Fred Drake. And interesting, it's just some dude, just some fella who was working and decided to write a module that would make life interesting for people, make it easier for people, and he went ahead and published it, and now we're all using it. And you can see he just did it because he needed it. And once he finished it, he said, this would be a great aid to humanity. I'm going to go ahead and build it out and complete it and error check it so that other people can use it. And eventually they made it part of the Python distribution. So now our friend Fred Drake is, part of the Python distribution. He's secured his immortality for this life. So now, the point that we're making is that Python needs to look somewhere for any given module. And the question again becomes, if a file system is very large and Python can't search for the entire file system, through the entire file system for a file, how's it going to find it? It's going to find it by looking through just a discrete set of directories. And let's look at what that search path is. We call it a search path. And it's going to be located in a variable called Sis Path. Now, when you look at Sis Path, you can see what type of variable Sis Path is. It's a little like sysarg. It's a list. It's a list of strings. And if you look closely, you can see the very first place that Python looks is my local directory. Now, I stupidly made my project directory end in py. That was not intended. That's actually a directory. It's not a Python file, but that was just a mistake that I made. You can also see that there are a number of other directories that seem to refer to my own personal directories. They're ones that are inside my home directory, and we're going to have to get to those in a minute because I'm going to show you how you can make your own directories part of this path. But then below it, you can see a bunch of other directories, and these are directories that relate to the Python installation itself. That is the location of files like JSON, pprint, sys, and others. JSON and pprint are located off of directories that you will find in this list. This list of directories is what we call the module search path. The module search path is a list of paths, a list of directories that Python can use to seek out a module when you say import module. Import pprint. Where does it find it? It looks through each one of these directories until it finds it. And if you compare the print that you saw of the value that you saw when you printed, let's say a pprint dot file with double underscores, you're going to find that that directory is one of these directories. So it's pretty exciting to consider that we could, maybe it's not so exciting, to consider that we could actually modify this list. In fact, one thing that we could do, although we never do, is append to Sis Top Path. But we never do this, and I want to caution you that this is not how we solve this problem. The problem that we may have is this. In the future, you're going to be writing modules. You will have modules that you'd like to use throughout any number of other files, of other scripts that you write. In other words, we're often writing functions that we look at and say, hey, this is a function that I might want to use in some other program. I'd like to make it part of my own personal library of modules. I'd like to make it part of my own personal module library of functions. I'd like to have this available anytime I write a Python script because this function is so useful. Or it could also be a constant value or some other list or string value that you find useful. You can define that inside a module and then import it for later use in another Python script. But how do we modify this module search path? Well, we can do it through an environment variable. And to do this, I'm going to pull up a terminal window. In fact, it'll probably be more useful for me to pull up a terminal window that is actually not part of PyCharm to show you that this has nothing to do with Python except that Python uses it. Instead, this is a variable that's defined in the operating system. We call variables defined on the operating system environment variables. An environment variable is a variable defined for the operating system. An environment variable is a variable that's defined to help the operating system do its work. One of those environment variables that you may have seen before is called path. Path is an environment variable used by the operating system to help it find programs. So when we say something like WC or LS or any other Python or even Python, the operating system makes use of the paths in its path variable to find those programs. You understand that Python is available throughout my system, but it's actually located only in one directory. So when I type Python, the operating system goes and looks for Python in one of these directories. In fact, it can find it right here. It's the very first directory in the path. Similarly, we have another variable called Python path. Now, you're not going to see anything for the Python path unless you specifically set it before. The Python path is a list of directories that Python will use to search for a module. Let's write that out because we've said quite a lot so far. The Python path environment variable contains paths that Python will add to Sis Path and thus will be available when we are importing modules. So, as you know, when we say import sys or when we say import mymod, any of these modules, whenever we say import, Python consults syspath. Syspath is a list of strings with paths to search for modules. Again, when we say import mymod or import pprint, Python consults the syspath. But if we want Python to consult more than just its default directories, just the directories that it normally consults for things like sys or JSON or pprint, we need to add to syspath. The way we do that customarily is through the Python path environment variable. That contains paths that Python will add to syspath and thus will be available when we're importing modules. Now, how do you set an environment variable? Well, in Unix, you would use the export command. Now, I'm not going to go over this now because it's different on Unix and on Windows. And in fact, I would need to go into more detail about setting it permanently. We can set it within a particular session by, so I could maybe set a new variable and then I can refer to it later on. But the fact is, environment variables on Unix are usually set in a special file called bash profile, but I'm not going to go into those details right now. On Windows, as you may know, you can set environment variables through the Windows GUI, the Windows Graphical User Interface, that is, through the menus. You can search it, by the way, by just going down to the search box, typing set environment variable, and it'll show you, it'll lead you to that place where you can set your Python path environment variables. As I said before, it's going to be set with a series of directories, and those directories will be separated by colons. These directories will be all your custom places where you'd like Python to look for modules. That's how we do it using this system. We set Python path to set a series of directories, and then we put our importable modules inside one of those directories.